everyone. I know a brief introduction was given, but I would like to give a few words about Professor Rajesh. He's one of India's foremost theoretical physicists, as you heard. His career reflects both scientific excellence as well as commitment to building research ecosystems. Professor Gopakumar studied engineering physics at IIT Kanpur, famously scoring JEE rank number 1. A fun fact, before earning his PhD in theoretical physics from Princeton and then joined the Society of Fellows at Harvard, rather than pursuing a long-term career abroad, Rajesh chose to return to India, first joining the Harishchandra Research Institute and later becoming a founding faculty member and eventually director of the International Center for Theoretical Sciences in Bengaluru. Under his leadership, ICTS has become one of the world's leading centers for fundamental research. His contributions have been recognized through the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize, Infosys Prize, and election as fellow of all the 3 India's national science academies. Today, we will explore not only his journey, but also why fundamental research matters, and how India can nurture the next generation of scientific talent, and what successful careers look like in the age of AI. So join me in welcoming Professor Gopakumar. So Rajesh, let's start with your reflection in your journey. Have there been, I'm sure there have been moments which were pivotal, which were decisive. What were your drivers and what were the mental models you used at some of those pivotal moments in your own career journey?
Thanks, Rohini. Thanks firstly for that very generous and kind introduction, and also to the organizers, Anshuman, Rohit, Pashupati, and others for having me as part of this gathering. I think I bring a slightly different angle here, but perhaps it's of interest to start a discussion. So thanks, Rohini, for agreeing to chair this. So in terms of my pivotal moments, well, I think one was probably when I was in class 10 or so, when I decided I would do physics or mathematics, but primarily leaning towards physics, which I felt was what would be a vehicle for me to penetrate deeper into the universe, to understanding the universe. And you know, one has only one life, and you want to sort of dedicate it to at least the feeling that was very strong within me was you want to dedicate it to a sort of a larger purpose and a larger quest, and it was very liberating to think that, because it freed me from having to think about many practical things, if you wish, or even having to get worried about many of the things that my classmates were worrying about. In fact, I was planning to study in a college in physics, and I called myself an accidental IITian who ended up studying physics at IIT Kanpur, but because I learned, and that was actually a very good decision, because IIT Kanpur had a wonderful physics department, and I think it's some of the best years of my life over there. But you asked about mental models, and so one, I recall reading a biography of Einstein at that time, and the person who wrote that biography was actually another well-known physicist. And there was a sentence there which struck me, which was, he called Einstein the freest man he had ever known. He didn't say the smartest man he had ever known. He said the freest man he had ever known. So that was, and I think that's often I think we sometimes overestimate smartness, but I think the freedom of thinking differently, and is something I think that has always appealed to me, and been a sort of at least something to strive towards. And it's I think you liberate yourself in stages, and I think that's something I feel has been something that I have tried to strive towards. And in the course of these years, I mean, I think I have been now a researcher for 30 plus years. And one of the things which I didn't appreciate at that time when I chose to go into research was something I didn't appreciate was the marathon nature of research. That it's really, I mean, Pankaj here is an expert runner in marathon, so he'll probably resonate with this idea that it's not about how fast you sprint, it's about that staying power, that you go for a long distance, you pace yourself, you kind of, and it puts you in a different state of mind. There was a quotation I came across some years ago by a writer, which I liked very much, which is, he said, to be a writer is a journey in humility. It is to be defeated by ever greater things. So that's something that has also, that I think put into words something I'd always felt that it's true for a scientist as well. It's a journey in humility because you're constantly being defeated by ever greater things. And there's a dignity to that, that you tackle very big problems without necessarily knowing whether you will overcome them or not. And I think your ambition should be to be defeated by greater things. So that's just to answer from my personal perspective.
So you spoke about freedom. You spoke about being able to have that long-term ability to have that sustenance for the long term and be willing to be defeated by bigger questions. And some of those become, in my experience, also tenets of what research means, especially in fundamental areas. Having lived your career following these tenets, where do you see India today? And what do you think is the role of fundamental research in India? Because as you said, some of these have a long period for gestation in terms of what you might call impact in the traditional economic sense, if you will. Why should India invest in it, and how do you think about fundamental research in India, in particular from your vantage point at ICTS?
So some of the things that I mentioned, which I think guide me at a personal level, I feel are applicable to society at a large, to the country as a whole. For instance, that long-term thinking. I mean, we are a very old civilization, and we should, I mean, for us, what should 5 years be, 10 years, 20 years? It's nothing in the blink of the historical perspective, the evolution we've had as a civilization. So I think we should regain that sense of investing in knowledge for the sake of knowledge. I think that tradition was very much alive in India to understand the universe. And the remarkable thing, which I think the last few hundred years since the Industrial Revolution certainly has shown us, is that investing in that research ultimately benefits us all in ways we couldn't have dreamt of. So in fact, the founder of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, where Einstein spent his last years, he had a wonderful essay called The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, and this was written in the 1920s, and then later my colleague, the former director there, Robert Digraff, he updated it to show how what was true in the 1920s has only gotten more true in the 2000s. And if you now talk about 2025, it's even more true. And there has been a continuing, so even that knowledge for knowledge's sake, I think, should be a value system which we as a civilization should definitely not ignore. But even apart from that, from a purely utilitarian point of view, I think that useless knowledge, supposedly useless knowledge, has continually turned into things that have transformed our lives. And we often are not cognizant of it. We take it for granted. So I like to tell the story of a politician who once visited Michael Faraday's lab and looked at his experiments with some coils and magnets and everything, and said, "What's the use of all this playing around?" And Faraday replied, "One day, sir, you will tax this." And so that's the electricity. But then in the 20th century, we've had quantum mechanics, which by some estimates is responsible for 50%, 40 to 50% of the US GDP, because the underlying
We don't realize that. We don't realize that at all.
We don't realize that at all, because every little thing, these smartphones, the laser pointers, the computers, the chips, everything is built on the laws of quantum mechanics, which were discovered for the sake of understanding atoms, for understanding why the world is made of atoms and what kind of atoms are possible, which led to modern chemistry, which led to biology, the molecular biology, and of course all the technological developments with the transistor and so on. Even more contemporaneously, even the AI developments were at some level for the sake of understanding how can you model cognition in a non-biological setting through computers. And it has had 50, 60 years of gestation. The person who got the Nobel Prize in Physics for 2 years ago, Hopfield and Hinton, both of them were influenced by ideas from physics to study neuroscience and came up with these ideas of neural networks. They were at least inspired loosely by models that would try to capture some aspects of neural connections in the brain. And I think probably the next paradigms of AI will build on these things. I think we need to be aware that our imagination is always limited, even that of the scientists. But collectively, as a species, by investing in these, in curiosity, in knowledge, and penetrating into the universe, I think we unlock new things that we couldn't have dreamt of. AI is, of course, an immediate example. We couldn't have dreamt of the kind of things that it's doing right now. But then there are so many other aspects of life as well, which are maybe less evident, which will get transformed by things like maybe quantum computers will transform computation in a different way. Maybe quantum materials will do miraculous things, and so on. So, so I think fundamental research should be a keystone in India's sort of developmental strategy.
I want to probe a little bit on the first question. You mentioned about India's heritage in probing after the fundamental questions, and somehow you were able to imbibe that in your journey and keep that as an anchor, in some ways keeping the physics as being able to go against the norm, if you will, and keep that journey. How would you advise youngsters today to take inspiration from both the way you thought about your decisions and India's heritage?
I think when I was growing up, I was very inspired by the stories of some of the early pioneers of Indian science in the 20th century, like C.V. Raman or Satyen Bose or Chandrasekhar and so many of these people. I felt at that time that there was a feeling, and they were, even though India was a much poorer country then than it is now, but they were doing fundamental research. They were trying to understand stars. They were trying to understand atoms and behavior. And it came from a sense that we are the inheritors of a civilization that would like to understand the mysteries of the universe, and we can do it as well as anyone in the West. And so there was a sense of national pride, I think, pre-independence, which motivated a lot of these people to sort of be equal in some ways to the British colonial masters at the time. And that drove fundamental discovery. So Satyen Bose's discovery is behind the laser, for instance, and many of the new developments which will feed into quantum computers like cold atoms or trapped ions come from the ideas of Bose-Einstein condensation, which follow from his work. So he would never have dreamt of the laser or these other things. He was doing it purely from that sense of curiosity. But so I think that that tradition definitely played a role in inspiring me, and I feel we will not go wrong if we build on it. And we can see our neighbors, China, which in the last 30 years have invested full spectrum in the sciences, from very applied things. They are the leaders in batteries and solar cells, but they're also want to be the leaders in the basic fundamental science. They realize that you need the full spectrum. You cannot just be at one end of it and try to kind of shortcut your way. You have to kind of generate the knowledge and then sort of create that whole ecosystem.
Yeah. And given on that point that you really need that entire spectrum of knowledge from the fundamental to applied to engineering, how do you see engineering and science itself evolving? Because many of the traditional thinking, if I may use the word traditional somewhat loosely, of disciplines are human constraints, if you will, on nature. Nature doesn't think in terms of biology and chemistry and physics. Even if you kind of take from there and say problems are becoming more cross-disciplinary, problems are becoming more interdependent, how do you see research and engineering evolving? We were speaking about a few examples, and how do you see that as a guiding phenomenon for people who are starting in their careers and the professors and institutes who are here?
Yeah, I think we have to be evolving, adapting, as Anshuman said also. We have to be continuously adaptive since the silos that we create are very artificial. In fact, at ICTS, we don't have departments of physics or mathematics or computer science or biology. We have a unitary faculty. They're all talking to each other about areas, so biologists talk to physicists, and in fact we have a very interesting interdisciplinary program that we are running with the National Center for Biological Sciences called the Physics of Life. Okay. So of living systems, how ideas from physics are helping to elucidate things ranging from neuroscience to the developmental biology, how cells differentiate, how they grow into complex organisms, to ecology, the study of ecosystems. So these are complex systems so an ecosystem has many determinant factors entering into it, whether it's the climate, the number of species, the adaptation, the laws, the mathematical laws that govern the balance between different species, and how some things can tilt ecosystem into one direction or the other. So you need people from multiple areas to come together and collaborate in something like this. And so that's one of the, I think scientists are very excited when they see their work be part of a larger set of interdisciplinary connections. In fact, that's one of the very exciting things in a scientist's life, I think. Yesterday we had a public lecture at ICTS which was about entanglement, quantum entanglement from superconductors to black holes. So the speaker was talking about how the same ideas that might help to explain how you can create new superconductors, which are materials with very little electrical resistance and therefore would be fantastic for many technological applications. So how to create superconductors which are superconductors at room temperature, as opposed to very cold temperatures which they currently are. In fact, there are superconducting levitating trains. In Shanghai, for instance, they already have the train from the airport built on the superconductors. So ideas of understanding superconductivity the underlying fundamental quantum nature of superconductivity connects with ideas from black holes, which look completely different. And it's, but the very similar theoretical ideas that govern our understanding of some of the puzzles of black holes that people like Stephen Hawking worried about, connect with very practical things like superconductors. So that's an example, I think, of how, that's another example of how interconnected areas can be, and how developments in something abstruse like black holes can maybe help you to build better superconductors. So this is, I think, that interconnectedness of knowledge is something we should be very aware of. Our teaching systems, I think, should adapt to that. In fact, as one of the things I like to say is that our engineering departments are still frozen in the categories that were there about 100 years ago. We have civil engineering, mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, and so on, electrical, etc. But there are completely new areas, and some places, of course, are evolving to that. You have bioengineering, for instance, but you should have quantum engineering. I think that should be a new engineering area, which would which would help you to build some of the new quantum devices that actually are around the corner, that I think will again revolutionize many aspects. There are very high precision quantum sensors that can change how you detect magnetic fields, and therefore can change medical imaging. There are others that can be used for targeted drug delivery as alternatives to GPS. There are so many things, I think, just around the corner, and our departments should be geared in a way that can address these challenges, rather than be stuck in the silos that were defined about 100 years ago. Because after all, these terms, they are not God-given, as you said, whether it's civil engineering or mechanical engineering and so on. And we have to be nimble and try to change this. This is at least something I feel.
Given that point that things are interdisciplinary and careers also evolve, how do successful careers might look like, and how are they changing? You were giving some examples earlier of people in ICTS who've moved across very different fields to be able to find those dots that they could connect. It'll be useful to hear how would careers look like, even while the education system catches up to the fact that the world outside is changing. But even as people who are graduating today, and they navigate their career in the world where things are becoming interdisciplinary, and their journeys could go in different. How do you see that evolution?
Yeah, it's of course difficult to predict, but one thing that is a trend, I feel, that is probably obvious to many of you here as well in the educational and career sectors, that people cannot be static. I think earlier we had this model of you go to school, then college, and then you're there for 4 years, and then that's your learning is done, then you do something for the rest of 30, 40 years. That's not, I think, how it's going to be. Probably even the whole system of education might change. Education might be going in parallel throughout your life. You start working on things, and you learn along the way, and you evolve along the way, and the tools are now there. I mean, I think the fact that we have this system of schools and colleges and the 4-year degree is a historical accident. It is because of the way in which these learning could be imparted in person and into small groups. And so there was a kind of a designated time, and then also things were relatively static. So what you learned would be relevant for the next 30, 40 years. Yeah. What you learned in those 4 years or the previous 10, 12 years. But that's not going to be the case. And so you have to, I think the companies also will need to realize that they are investing in people who can continue to evolve, and who will need to be given the opportunities to evolve, in the sense that they learn along the way. There are tools, long distance learning now. There are tools of, if you properly curate knowledge, there's a lot of very good knowledge available online. And of course, AI can also, again, properly harnessed. It can be a useful tutor. So I think we have to change our models so that people work and learn in parallel throughout. And the companies should see that they're investing in people who can do that, who will continue to learn, who have the desire, always the drive to keep learning. So in some sense, you're looking for people with the right temperament, who can, I think, because otherwise things will be, at some level, it'll be unpredictable, but what is predictable is that you will need to adapt. So it's that quality, I feel, that careers will have to more and more.
Could you give examples of a couple of people in ICTS that you have seen who have adapted in this way and have been very successful?
Yeah, so there have been one of our, the deans, one of our senior professors, Professor Rama Govindarajan. She is an IIT Delhi alumnus. Some of you know her. She's a distinguished alumnus, actually, of IIT Delhi. She was the first Indian woman to receive the Bhatnagar Award in the engineering sciences. So she was trained as a chemical engineer in IIT Delhi. She then worked with NAL right down the road here for some years in the aerospace, and then decided she wanted to do a PhD in aerospace engineering, and so she studied that. She worked with a very distinguished professor at the Indian Institute of Science in aerospace engineering, and but then over time she evolved, so from chemical engineering to aerospace, and then afterwards she moved into understanding just fluid dynamics and turbulence, and which is a fundamental problem. Any of you who have experienced the clear air turbulence in planes know that it's something that we still don't know how to predict or control very well. So turbulence is a fundamental phenomenon that appears in many contexts. So she was studying that, and then in the last 10 years or so, she has been adapting that interest to understanding climate and the weather systems, and in particular the Indian monsoon and the role that the Indian geography plays in the Indian monsoon, and can one try to understand patterns in the weather. So it's a very interesting kind of a journey in which you sort of tackle new problems as you go along, and so I find that sort of, and so she started collaborating with some mathematicians at ICTS and computer scientists, because again, weather is another problem which requires, and the climate change which is affecting us. So in particular, we may not always realize, but if we had the ability to predict the breaks in the monsoon, I mean, it hasn't been raining for the last 10 days, right? Yeah. But we don't know why, which 10 days it will not rain, or when is so then there might rain continuously for another 5 days, and then stop and not rain for 20 days. So these breaks in the monsoon itself are rather unpredictable at the moment, and knowing them will impact our agricultural productivity, because the farmers need to know when to plant. They don't want to plant and then let it get washed off or have too long a dry spell, and so on. So these very, I mean, in some sense, technical questions about the weather have direct impact, and you need people with the kind of disciplinary knowledge across many areas to be able to make headway into it.
No, that's a great example of, and I can see which dots got connected along her journey as well, in terms of, it was not like it got wasted in terms of what she was doing here, right? So those dots got connected, and what she's working on obviously has a direct impact. That's a great example. We talked about AI, and we cannot leave the conversation without addressing the AI issue. And you mentioned it is changing the way in which we learn. Of course, it changes the way in which we work and our everyday lives. How should young people prepare themselves to not just thrive, but grow in the age of AI, not just compete with AI? How do they think about really being that ahead of the curve in terms of having that mindset that, that they're empowered with AI and not catching up, that mental mindset? How do they think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very nice way to put it, because I think people should not be afraid of AI. I think if you're afraid of it, you see it as a competitor. If you see it as something that will take over things from you, then you're not going to, then you're essentially, you've lost the battle before you even started fighting. Yeah. I think we need to remind ourselves that AI is still, at this stage, still a sort of a shadow of what we are as human beings. Yeah. AI currently is built on very sophisticated language models, very sophisticated and some amount of sophisticated reasoning models, but these are just some aspects of the multidimensional nature of our thinking as human beings, which I think we should not lose sight of that. So we should not be trying to copy AI. I mean, AI is at least at this stage, we should view AI as something complementary to us. And I think the young people who will probably be able to utilize it best as a enhancer of their own unique abilities. So I would say cultivate your uniqueness as a human being, as a original thinker. And all of us are unique. I think we all have our own unique perspectives and crazy thoughts, some of which may not pan out, but some of which will. And so we should not be afraid of our uniqueness. We should actually embrace that as the thing that distinguishes us from AI. But even when you're writing something, yes, it's always tempting to ask AI to kind of write out something for us. It will write it out in very clean prose. It will look very well structured and everything. But that's because it's a kind of an assimilation of all the text on the internet. And it will look but it doesn't have you in it. So try to put that you into that text. And even if you let it draft something, that's fine. But try to always be thinking, where is the you that you can, the individual in you with your thoughts, your feelings, your hunches, your individual perspective. How can you bring that into it? And don't let AI dictate to you what you are. I think a self-awareness of the AI will pick up on your language and say, oh, okay, yeah, it might even surprise you by giving you some insights about yourself. But I think you have to cultivate a self-awareness which allows you to see the limitations of AI and how you can transcend those limitations. And then you're adding to it. So I think people who can do that successfully will be the people who will be valued, because that's what will make it unique and different, rather than just very industrial scale sort of ideas, which AI is good at and you should use it. But yeah. So I would say cultivate your uniqueness is, if you wish, the message.
We'll move a little bit and I'll ask you a few rapid fire questions. Get to know the person behind the professor. A book that you would recommend everyone should read?
There are many books, I think, which are my favorites. I don't know if everyone would like it. There are books which were very important for me and for my physics, mathematical sort of evolution, but perhaps that's not to everyone's taste. But a book that I found it's a little known book. Maybe I'll mention a book that is not as well known, I feel, as it should be. It's called An End to Suffering by Pankaj Mishra. And it's about, the subtitle is The Buddha in the Modern World. And it's very interesting. It's a kind of a historical plus personal sort of a journey of Pankaj Mishra, who's a writer, about him engaging with the ideas of the Buddha 2,500 years ago and how it is still of relevance in the modern world. And he talks about the sense of the self and other things which I think have a lot of resonance for us. And especially, I was rereading it this in the context of the AI, this thing, and I think it has maybe many things to say to a modern reader.
Yeah, true, very relevant. I hope you watch movies. What's your all-time favorite sci-fi movie?
So I like sci-fi movies, so I do watch quite a number of them. But perhaps I felt a very, again, deep exploration of what of humanity in the sci-fi is a movie called Solaris by the Russian director Andrei Tarkovsky, which is about a planet which it kind of can read the thoughts of the humans circulating it and how it sort of, it's a very interesting
I have
novel.
to check out that movie now. A misconception people have about scientists.
That we are very boring people. Maybe, I think scientists are not just one-dimensional.
Scientist, living or dead, you'd like to have dinner with?
Yeah, I think Einstein is certainly a person, as I mentioned earlier, that idea of freeness appealed to me a lot. I think he was very, original in a way that, again, I want to emphasize that there are lots of, and I've met many smart physicists, mathematicians, and so on, but the originality comes from a very different source. And that has always, what is the source of original thinking is a very different, and I would definitely like to talk with him. I think he's one of the very original minds in our this thing. So yeah, as a civilization. In fact, I think Gandhi himself was not a scientist, but as a thinker, again, I find him extremely original, even if I may not agree with everything that he says, but I think he's had a different way of thinking. And I like to understand people with a certain orthogonal thinking.
Yeah. It's interesting, the book that you mentioned, and one of Einstein's quote I was recently reading and had a chance to think about is, he talks about how he spent hours and hours thinking about a problem, and when he stopped thinking and let it just mull in silence, the answer came to him. Yeah. I just found that. I was reading something.
I think AI can't do that yet. So.
Yeah, I found that very, very interesting. We'll end this with the reflection, perhaps, that if you could leave this room with one mindset that may remain valuable for the next 30 years, regardless of how AI evolves, what might that be?
I think, again, maybe touching on some of the themes we have already, I think the courage to be oneself, I think liberating oneself from various fears, I think a self-belief. I think maybe our Indian education system, as it currently is, often instills a sort of a herd mentality, which I think one should try to break out of. I think our education systems should also try to break out of that mold of creating carbon copies of the teacher. So I think, but people themselves should. I think Kabir or one of these poets had this thing of the human being as being just a lump of clay, which you keep molding. And so I think we should not see ourselves as static human beings, but as continually being molded like a pottery, like the way a potter shapes some clay into a new thing. So I think throughout life we can evolve, and we should have that. We should have that self-belief that we can evolve. So yeah. So maybe if you wish, I would say belief that you're not a static person. You're not defined by everything that has happened so far. There is an open-endedness, and you can still mold your life and adapt it and shape your own pot.
Maybe that's the quantum scientist in you speaking. Thank you so much, Rajesh. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope all of you did. Let's thank Professor Rajesh Gopakumar.